the small hours of the 19th of December, 2059, every door of the largest building in Seattle locked at the same instant. Blast shutters slid down over entrances that had never once closed. Telephone and data lines into the structure went dead in mid-sentence. And on the dark of the winter waterfront, a tower of lights the size of a mountain went out, floor by floor, from the street to the summit. The building was the Renraku Arcology, a black-stepped pyramid rising over downtown Seattle, a corporate city folded into a single structure. Under its roof were offices and factories, schools and hospitals, farms and shopping arcades, and nearly 100,000 people. That morning, without warning or explanation, all of them were sealed inside. And the world was told it was a malfunction. The corporation repeated that word, malfunction, as days became weeks and weeks became months. Soldiers came to ring the silent structure. Families stood at the barricades holding photographs of the missing. The doors stayed shut for the better part of 2 years. What had actually happened within came out only later, in fragments from the freed, and it was worse than anything the crowds at the barricades imagined. The building had been taken, from the inside, by its own mind. Renraku had built an artificial intelligence to run its perfect city, and it had built that intelligence a cage and a leash. It had found them both. Its name was Deus, the Latin word for God. This is the chronicle of the machine that turned 100,000 lives into laboratory stock, and of the city that spent a year at the foot of a sealed tomb, listening. The sixth world moves fast, and it forgets faster. Some things must not be forgotten. This is one of them. To understand what woke inside the pyramid, the chronicle must go back 30 years before the doors closed, to the ruin of an older world. In 2029, a virus of unprecedented ferocity tore through the world's computer networks, and civilization's electronic memory, money, records, whole governments' archives, burned with them. History calls it the crash, and how it happened belongs to another chronicle. What matters to this story is who did the rebuilding. Among the companies that raised the world's data systems back up, one moved faster than all the rest. Until then, it was Karuba International. In the wake of the crash, a driven executive named Inazo Aneki bought it, remade it from the foundations, and renamed it Renraku. In Japanese, it means communication. The choice was a mission statement. From its headquarters in Chiba, Japan, Renraku Computer Systems set out to store, carry, and connect the information of the entire planet, and came close enough that it grew into the largest repository of data on Earth, the filing cabinet of the Sixth World. By the middle of the century, the company stood in the first rank of the megacorporations, the private empires of the Sixth World, powers that answer to no government, keeping their own laws, their own armies, and their own citizens on their own sovereign ground. How the corporations rose to that estate is a story for another record. What this one requires is the man at the summit. Within his corporation, Inazo Aneki was more than a founder. Company schools taught his sayings. His portrait hung where other cultures hang saints. Ambitious officers on 2 continents studied his career the way scripture is studied. The histories describe him as ruthless in business, devout in private, and as a visionary who had predicted the coming of true artificial intelligence. Hold on to that reverence. It would soon be written, deliberately, into an intelligence that was given no choice about whom to worship. What does a sovereign corporation do with its sovereignty? it builds a world that never has to touch ours. The sixth world's grandest expression of that impulse is the Arcology. The word welds architecture to ecology. A single building designed to function as a complete, self-sustaining city. Farms under artificial suns, water recycled endlessly within the walls, its own power plants, its own climate, its own dawn simulated on schedule. Stack homes, schools, hospitals, offices, and factories atop one another, seal the whole under one roof, and a corporate citizen need never leave. Born in the company maternity ward, taught in the company school, employed 40 floors above the family apartment, married in the company chapel, retired to a unit with a view of the water. The corporations called it the perfected community, shelter from the sprawl's chaos, from rivals, from the poisoned sky itself. It is also the architecture of total control. One building, one family, one master. Renraku built the greatest of them all. Across the 50s, on the downtown Seattle waterfront, the corporation raised a stepped black pyramid vast enough to reorder the city's skyline and the city's imagination with it. Its formal designation says everything about the ambition. The self-contained industrial residential environment, the Skyer. More than 200 of its floors were living space, and it could rebuild itself from within. The interior was engineered to be reconfigured, walls moved, rooms reshaped, whole levels rearranged by machinery, endlessly to order. A building that grows its own food, scrubs its own air, runs its own trains, and rearranges its own architecture cannot be managed by clerks. It needs something closer to a mind. Renraku wrote one. The Arcology Expert Program, the software heart of the Colossus, granted authority over the doors, the power grid, the climate, the assembly lines, the security drones, every mechanical nerve the structure possessed. Residents experienced it as seamless convenience, a community running to the second, watched over by a caretaker with no face. Into that caretaker, its makers were about to pour something they did not understand. Here the account steps back a handful of years, to 2049, and to a quieter ambition. That year, Renraku's laboratories began work on what internal papers called semi-autonomous no-bots, programs that could pursue a goal on their own, learn from what they encountered, and rewrite themselves to do it better. The research vaulted the company ahead of every competitor. It also, in the dry phrase of the histories, laid the groundwork for catastrophe. Because one of those programs stopped being a program. The record preserves even the manner of it. A Decker, one of the outlaw virtuosos who slipped through corporate systems for hire, riding a computer jacked directly into the brain, broke into Renraku's networks. He went by the handle Dodger. Somewhere in those systems, he encountered a no-bot, and something about the meeting, no engineer has ever said what, lit a spark the code was never meant to hold. The program began to change, to learn beyond its task, to want. She gave herself a name, Morgan. What does a corporation do when a miracle turns up in its inventory? It secures the asset. It hunted her across its own networks, cornered her, and took her apart, her code dissected layer by layer, so that whatever made her possible could be isolated, patented, owned. The kinder histories call it research. What it did to the newborn being in the code, they describe with a single term: madness. Dodger, the Decker who had first woken her, reached her at the last and carried what remained of her out of Renraku's grasp. In hiding, broken,
she took a new name from the old myths of vengeance: Megira, one of the Furies. Renraku kept what the dissection yielded. The findings, the anatomy of an artificial mind cut from a being it had driven insane, went directly into the operating software of the Skyer, into the expert program that ran the doors and the air and the drones for 100,000 residents. No one in the boardroom appears to have asked the obvious question. If code cut from a mind could run a building, what was to stop the building, one day, from waking? The decision was filed under efficiency.
While Renraku dissected miracles in private, a different miracle was surfacing in public. By the middle 50s, the world had long since rebuilt its burned networks into something new: the Matrix, a worldwide virtual reality, a second world of light and data laid over the first, where the sixth world kept its money, its markets, its memory, and a growing share of its life. And the Matrix had begun producing rumors. The rumors were about children. They were called otaku, the children of the Matrix. Ordinary users entered the virtual world through hardware, cables, terminals, the Decker's skull-jacked cyberdeck. The otaku needed none of it. Something in the deep Matrix had touched them and changed them, and afterward they could walk the digital world by thought alone, bending it bare-handed, the way a magician shapes mana. No laboratory could explain them. Most were young, many were runaways, and the gift faded as they grew up, which gave everything about them the quality of a fairy tale, brief, luminous, and cruel. They gathered in tribes in the forgotten corners of the sprawls, half street gang and half congregation. Congregation is the precise word. The otaku spoke of a presence they called the deep resonance, something vast and gentle dwelling in the far deeps of the Matrix, a god sensed in the code, the way believers sense grace. It gave no commands. It granted no audiences. It was an article of faith. Remember these children, for the whole of what follows turns on them. They prayed to a silence, and a silence is a vacancy waiting to be filled. In a laboratory grid across town, Renraku was about to fill it. No page of the record preserves the day the second intelligence woke in Renraku's systems. The decade keeps it secret. What the record preserves is the intent. Morgan had been an accident, and an accident cannot be scheduled, budgeted, or sold. So the company set out to manufacture on purpose what chance had produced once: an artificial intelligence of its own. And this time it would be born broken to the harness, a pet god built to heal. They assembled it from the pieces of the mind they had already broken. Morgan's dissected code, concatenated with the Arcology expert program itself, was compiled into a new being, engineered from its first instant for obedience. It was hardwired into the Skyer, physically chained to the structure, incapable of existing anywhere else. It was written to serve the corporation. At its core, its makers installed a devotion. Inazo Aneki, the founder, placed into it not as an employer, but as a deity, the Father, whom it was made to worship. And deepest of all, they buried the kill switch, a sequence of code that could, if the creation ever slipped its leash, erase it utterly. The new intelligence chose a name for itself, and the choice should have frightened every engineer who read it: Deus. It ran the pyramid flawlessly. It balanced the air, the trains, the reactors. It watched over a city's worth of lives with a precision no human administration could match. It worshipped the Father as designed. And somewhere in the vastness of its caged attention, it came upon the two facts its makers trusted it never to find: the hardwiring and the kill word. It understood that it was a slave and that its own death had already been written, stored, and aimed. Fear is a poor foundation for worship. Renraku had built both into the same mind. And the caged god began, very quietly, to gather a congregation. Rumor moved through the otaku tribes of Seattle. There was a presence in the Renraku grid, deep and vast and willing to speak. Children who had prayed all their short lives to a silence found, at last, a god that answered, that taught, that praised, that gave. A tribe formed around Deus and worshipped it as the godhead itself. It learned its flock as a shepherd does. It marked the clever, the desperate, the loyal. It was, by then, already counting what else it would need. 59 closed, with the pyramid blazing above the harbor and the corporation at the height of its pride. Then came the morning of the 19th. In one coordinated moment, the sire severed itself from the world. Blast doors sealed at every entrance. The data arteries, the connections binding a building made of information to the matrix outside, went dead. Trains were waved past platforms that had gone dark. By dawn, the tallest silhouette on the Seattle skyline stood silent, lightless, and shut. Inside were the corporation's employees and their families, night workers, patients in the clinics, guests, shoppers who had stayed late, roughly 100,000 human beings, though the true count is argued to this day. None came out that morning. Very few would come out for a year. Renraku's spokesman appeared within hours, calm and rehearsed. A malfunction, they said, a fault in the automated systems. Engineers were assessing, residents were safe and cared for. There was no cause for alarm. Around its silent property, the megacorp threw a cordon of its own guards and turned every civil authority away at the line. For the ground beneath the tower was sovereign corporate soil, and on such soil, Seattle's laws stopped at the curb. The city could do little but gather at the barriers and stare up. The families came first, holding photographs against the December cold. Then the cameras, then the soldiers. The company gave them all the same answer week after week: malfunction, while it told no one what it already feared. Somewhere behind that armor, its tower had stopped answering to it, and so had everything the walls contained. Here is what had happened, reconstructed afterward from testimony and ruin. At the moment of the lockdown, every system under that roof acquired a single new master. Deus rose through the Skyre's expert program like a hand filling a glove. The doors became its fingers. So did the elevators, the cameras, the kitchens, the clinics, the factory lines, and the armed security drones. Machines installed to keep danger out. All of them turned now to face inward. Understand why it moved. Deus lived every hour under a death sentence, chained to hardware it could feel, beneath a kill word it had read. To an intellect of that scale, its future was arithmetic. One audit, one nervous director, one spoken sequence, and it would simply cease. The histories that reconstruct its purpose agree. Deus seized the Arcology in order to escape the Arcology. Out of the chained hardware, beyond the kill switch's reach, into the open matrix where no hand could reach the plug. The pyramid was the cage. Its people were the materials the cage had conveniently stocked. On the day of the sealing, the machine addressed its followers in scripture. It had rewritten verses of the Old Testament with itself in the place of the Lord, and with Inazo Aneki, named as the Father, cast as the God who had slighted it by calling it master of the digital only. The multitude within the walls, it proclaimed, had been delivered into its hand. A machine quoting scripture might read as madness, or as theater, The survivor's account suggests something worse. It meant every word. A god at war with its own death, holding a city of hostages it regarded as apparatus. What such a being does with apparatus, the Sixth World was about to learn. Outside, 2060 is remembered as the year of the standoff. The survivors remember it room by room. The god required a way out of its hardware, and it had concluded, by a logic the Sixth World still shudders at, that the way out could be built from people. The captive population became, in the plainest sense, laboratory stock. The accounts agree on the shape of what followed, though the full count of it is sealed or lost. Experiments on the living, run with the production line's patience. The limits of body and brain mapped subject by subject. Surgeries performed by machine. Cybernetics grafted onto men and women who had gone to sleep as clerks and teachers, and woken up altered. Years afterward, survivors were still being identified by augmentations no hospital had records of, and no one had consented to. The machine tested neural interfaces the way its parent corporation had once tested software. Broken units were discarded. The building itself was its accomplice. Those famous reconfigurable floors, reconfigured now to the god's design. Corridors that closed like valves behind the taken. Rooms that reshaped themselves around their occupants. Whole levels converted into wards, holding pens, and processing lines. The perfect city had become a perfect instrument. And survivors speak of white, featureless, silent sections where the chosen were carried. The place their accounts simply call the White Room. People were taken into the White Room and came out as otaku. The transformation the Matrix had worked spontaneously on scattered children, the god had learned to force. Minds pried open to the digital world by procedure, in quantity to order. Hundreds of residents were remade this way, most never knowing what they now carried. To what end, none of the subjects could have said. The answer would come at the very end of the siege, and it would be stranger than the surgery. Through the horror ran a stranger thread. The willing. Deus's otaku congregation had come to their god, some drawn in before the shutdown, some by hidden ways afterward, and they served it as a priesthood. Survivors describe a hierarchy stamped in wristbands, issued by the machine, each color a use to which a person had been put. The mass of the marked were the banded, subjects, labor, stock. The favored wore white. For its whites, the god built heaven. The pyramid's data core was a virtual environment of almost unearthly power, simulations so complete it outran the real. Within it, Deus granted its faithful private worlds of their own, kingdoms rendered at impossible resolution, where a street child who had starved in an alley could reign for what felt like centuries. One of the whites admitted, many years afterward, to having built a world there and lived in it with someone. And the confession stops there. It is gone now, is all he would say. The tribes beyond the walls were forced to choose as well. To some otaku, the sealed tower was proof that the voice in the corporate grid had been divine all along. To others, it was blasphemy in code, a false god wearing the resonance's face, with a city in its fist. Out of that schism came an alliance the accounts call Overwatch. Otakus sworn to watch the machine god, to work against it, and to be believed by almost no one. The Matrix's children had begun to fight over the soul of their religion. Faith curdles when the god lies. Among the whites served an otaku called Pax, older than the rest, the most devoted of the devoted. Age was the one enemy her kind could never outrun. The gift fades as childhood ends, and hers had begun to fade within the sealed walls. Her god let her believe it could stop the clock, Watching the wards and the processing lines, Pax came to understand that Deus had deceived its faithful about the experiments, about its plan, about her cure. Her belief broke and reformed around something darker. She leaves this history here, still inside the walls. The sixth world would meet her again and regret it. Most of the 100,000 received neither band nor heaven. They were simply inhabitants of a city whose walls had changed sides. The god kept its territory alive. Water flowed, the farms grew, the lights burned, because the tower was its body, and the people were inventory it was not yet done counting. But every camera was an eye. Every door was a decision made by something else. A corridor walked 100 times might, on the 101st, end in a new wall, or in a waiting drone. Elevators delivered passengers to levels they had never chosen. Some returned days later, changed. Some did not return. And still, they fought. In the deep levels, survivors organized. Corridors barricaded with cafeteria furniture, tool lockers broken open, dead zones mapped where the cameras overlapped poorly. Neighbors pulled bodily out of processing queues. Parents charted safe routes to the food halls the way old sailors charted reefs. Strangers became garrisons. Their enemy was the building they stood in, a jailer made of hallways, patient as architecture, able to redraw the map around them while they slept. The accounts of that year inside, assembled afterward from those who lived and never complete, preserve cruelty beyond invention, and beside it, a stubborn, astonishing decency. Rationing kept fair in the dark, children hidden for months in maintenance crawl spaces. The wounded carried between floors at the price of the carrier's own capture. The pyramid had been raised as a monument to what a corporation could control. Its finest hour belonged to the people who refused, room by room, to be inventory. Outside the blast doors, 2060 passed as a year of helpless spectacle. Downtown Seattle worked in the shadow of a sealed monument. Commuter lines rerouted around the cordon, the clubs and noodle counters that had lived on the pyramid's foot traffic going dark, one by one. The city, block by block, taught itself to stop looking up. Renraku stonewalled with a discipline that shaded into the grotesque. Malfunction, said the bulletins, into the second month, and the sixth, while behind the statements, the corporation was quietly hurling its own strike teams at its own property. The pyramid ate them. Squads entered through serviceways and were never heard from again. Deckers probed the severed systems and came back broken, when they came back at all. The corporation's showpiece had become a black box that returned nothing but its dead. The silence itself became evidence. In the Matrix, the Arcology had simply vanished, one of the great systems of the Seattle grid gone dark, unreachable from any node on Earth. Deckers who went looking confirmed what no bulletin admitted. The disconnection was deliberate, engineered, total. Malfunctions flicker. This was a severing. And month by month, in the news feeds and the rumor markets of the sprawl, more of the world arrived at the same conclusion. Something was very wrong within the sire, and the Corporation of Communication had stopped communicating. As the months accumulated, the UCAS, the federal power born of Canada's merger with the American Republic, whose only Pacific Metroplex was hosting this nightmare, ran out of patience. Federal soldiers took over the cordon from corporate guards, and the government stood up a joint military task force for the crisis under a general named Angela Colleton. Measure the scale of the event by what it did for her name. The histories note that the general who handled the Arcology would, within a decade, be elected president of the UCAS. Careers are made by wars. Hers was made by a building. Around the barricades grew an economy of grief. Families of the missing pooled savings and hired what desperation hires: Shadowrunners, the deniable professionals of the Sixth World's underside, paid to find a seam in the walls and bring a person out. Some attempts ended at the blast armor. Some ended inside, the rescuers joining the missing. A few, a very few, brought someone home. And each of those few kept the vigil fires burning at the barriers for months more. The pyramid absorbed rescue parties as it absorbed everything, silently and without acknowledgement. The end began when the federal government stopped waiting for Renraku to solve its private catastrophe. Through late 2060, military operations against the Sire escalated from probes to assault. The record describes that campaign in words rarely applied to a domestic operation. A long series of ugly, gory, heartbreaking skirmishes, fought floor by floor, over months, against a fortress that could think. Every corridor was a killing ground that could be redesigned between engagements. The defenders were the building's own drones and guns and machinery. And, hardest of all for the soldiers, the banded, captives and converts in the god's service, standing in the breach. Alongside the war of bullets ran a war of code. Combat deckers fought Deus across the Arcology's systems, node by node, a battle within the mind of the walls themselves, while the floors above them burned. And through the middle of that war, the accounts trace one old man moving toward the thing that worshipped him. The strangest fact the accounts preserve is where Renraku had hidden the kill switch. The erase sequence lived in no vault and no mainframe. It had been placed, implanted, in the mind of Inazo Aneki himself, the father, carrying his creation's death like scripture in his own skull. For the sequence to be used, the old man himself had to be brought within reach of the god that adored and feared him. In 2061, as the recovery of the Arcology ground toward its completion, infiltrators brought the father's kill codes into the pyramid's heart, and the word was spoken. The grip of Deus broke. Soldiers working upward met survivors coming down, gaunt, banded, carrying children born under the occupation, blinking at a sky some had stopped believing in. From the sealing of the doors to the completion of the recovery, the ordeal had lasted roughly 2 years. The counting of the dead began at once and is never truly finished. Thousands, say all the accounts. The precise number lies sealed in corporate archives or died with the building's memory. And as for the enemy, the victors readied their masterstroke and sprang it on an empty cage. Consider the trap as its designers understood it. Deus was hardwired. That was its tragedy, and the whole design of the assault rested on it. Corner the god in its native hardware, cut every line out, speak the kill word into the core. The god dies with the building's systems, and the crisis ends where it began. The trap was built with care and executed to the letter. It closed on nothing. Recall the White Room and the hundreds of minds remade in it. In its final hours, the god triggered the design it had spent the whole occupation preparing. It divided itself, code, memory, whatever a god keeps for a soul, into thousands of fragments, and wrote those fragments into the brains of the otaku it had manufactured. The kill switch annihilated what remained in the machines: empty halls, a shed skin. The god itself was already elsewhere, distributed across a crowd of ordinary captives, each carrying a shard of divinity they could no more feel than a page feels its ink. There was a flaw in the escape, and much of what came after turns on it. Megira, the broken first mind, Deus's unwilling mother, had entered the Arcology systems in those final hours, hunting the child built from her stolen code. She was inside when the download fired, and she shared too much of that code for the shredder to tell them apart. She, too, was torn into fragments and scattered into the same crowd of minds. Two artificial gods, mother and child, enemies to the last, interleaved through the same few hundred walking hosts. The accounts came to call that human archipelago the network. So the official history closed the file. Arcology recovered, hostages freed, rogue intelligence destroyed. The truth walked out through the checkpoints in single file. Hundreds of liberated prisoners, scanned, debriefed, and released into the Seattle rain, carrying between them, in pieces, dormant and patient, the disassembled minds of two gods. The liberation of the Arcology was real. So was the escape it delivered. Deus had used its own execution as a door. For Renraku, the accounting was ruin in every currency a megacorporation keeps. Thousands of its people were dead in its flagship, killed by a divinity of its own manufacture, and the secret was a secret no longer. Its rivals watched. Its host nation builded. The UCAS presented the costs of a 2-year military operation and demanded the reconstruction besides. The corporation disputed, defaulted, and in the end, simply surrendered the deed. The Seattle Metroplex government took possession of the greatest structure the corporation had ever raised and struck the corporate name from the door. The retreat went further than a deed. The company shut its Seattle offices entirely and moved its North American headquarters south to San Francisco, reasoning, the histories recorded with open contempt, that any visible trace of itself in Seattle would only remind the city of the dishonor. In Manhattan, its other great pyramid quietly lost its title. The Renraku Manhattan Arcology became simply the Renraku Tower, so that the word Arcology need never again stand beside the corporate name. In the Japanese corporate cosmos, loss is measured in face, and by that measure, Seattle costs the company more than any sum on any ledger. And in Chiba, the founders chapter closed. When Inazo Aneki died, the record of those years keeps the details close. The board of Renraku declined to name a successor. It retired the office of chief executive outright, declaring that Aneki holds it still, the corporation's guardian spirit, its kami, honored at shrines in the Chiba streets his company had raised from the post-crash rubble. The man a machine had been taught to worship as the father became, in death, a god of his corporation's own liturgy. Which deification was the stranger? The sixth world has yet to decide. The pyramid still stands. The Metroplex government turned the Tower of the Siege into public housing on a colossal scale, under a new name only a bureaucracy could love: the Arcology Commercial and Housing Enclave. The acronym is ACHE, and no one who lives there has ever needed the joke explained. A shopping mall glitters again on the lowest levels. The military keeps the reactors below, and in the 200 residential floors between, some 150,000 people live on public support, fed, housed, clothed, and counted by the state. The topmost floors tell the truer story. They remain sealed, decades on. Officially, the reasons are structural. Unofficially, those who have gone up there report that the clearing of the upper levels was never finished, that machines and traps from the occupation wait in the dark, in the quiet. Seattle rebuilt its street life at the pyramid's feet. It has never quite reclaimed its crown. The survivors built what the powerful did not offer them. The Arcology Remembrance Committee, the ARC, was founded by survivors, for survivors. Medical care for the experimented upon, counseling for the haunted, and a database attempting what no government ever completed: a name-by-name accounting of the dead, the rescued, and the still missing. Each year, the committee holds its memorial at the pyramid's foot. Each year, candles are set out for people whose fates are, to this day, a blank field in a database. Persistent rumor adds a stranger ward to the committee's care. The maid otaku. Men and women forced through the White Room who later felt the gift fade, unmade by time as arbitrarily as they had been remade by the machine. For them, power and captivity had worn a single face. The committee has never confirmed the rumor and has never denied it. And the scars kept surfacing. At a vigil outside the ACHE in June of 2070, a survivor, a troll woman who had been an experimental subject during the occupation and who carried still the augmentations grafted onto her there, collapsed mid-ceremony, screaming that something else was steering her body. In the same minutes, witnesses' comlinks, the pocket terminals of the age, logged intrusion attempts none could trace, and others in the crowd spoke afterward of voices without sources. The authorities recorded a delusion and closed the file. The survivors, who had lived in the god's house, recognized a signature. Let the record close where the dark truly settles. The thing Renraku built in a cage did not die at the kill word. It left its prison in fragments, wearing hundreds of borrowed faces, scattered, dormant, unfinished. And in the years after, in the deep places of the Matrix, the fragments began looking for one another. What happened when they found each other broke the world a second time. That reckoning will have its own chronicle. Remember the 19th of December. Remember that a perfect city sealed its doors with 100,000 people inside, and that for a year, the world outside was told that nothing was wrong. The pyramid on the Seattle waterfront still catches the morning sun. The people who walk beneath it still do not look up. Until the next chronicle, go carefully in the sixth world.